Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining the Great Dynamics podcast. My name is Ahmed Hassan, and today we have a very cool guest with us, Michael Blicher Soerensen. Michael is a military intelligence officer, served for 12 years in the Danish military. He specialized in electronic warfare and SIGINT. He did a combat tour in Iraq, and he's very passionate about corporate intelligence. Today, he's at Meta's data center. He's the global security lead, and we're going to do a little bit of a different introduction that we normally do. I'm going to talk about what we're going to talk about this episode, and then I will give it over to Michael like normal. So we're going to start with Michael's background. Then we're going into opportunities after working in SIGINT and Electronic Warfare. We're going to talk about an important topic in writing and intelligence called killing your darlings and keeping things brief. Then we're going to go over to adjusting to work outside of the army and the structure. From there on, we're going to talk about learning to build rapport with colleagues in the workplace and how different communication styles are from the military to the corporate setting. Then, what you guys probably are very interested in, what makes a good intelligence analyst. We're going to go into discovering new career opportunities and staying open-minded, Michael's experience on deployment, and commentary on how training and background can heavily influence an analyst's perspectives. And then we're all over the place, tailoring intelligence to consumer needs and creating valuable products, issues in the field of OSINT, intelligence professionals being able to educate consumers on intelligence, what intelligence can and cannot do, competing with other internal and external intelligence professionals in a corporate world, and the lack of tactical intelligence in the private sector, or having strategic intelligence analysts working on tactical problems and that often not going the way it should. And then intelligence products currently consumed by the corporate world and how they affect decision making. As always, we end with cultural recommendations. Over to you. Hi, Michael. Or Michael for our American and English listeners. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, Ahmed, for having me.
I've been following your work a little bit on Facebook and the stuff that you post. Super interesting. And I would love to hear more from you, how you got into what you're doing right now.
Well, I think, and I'll be happy to provide that background. It's very much a game of chance, so it's very much coincidence that I ended up where I'm at. At least that's the feeling that I'm sitting with, right? I joined the army. I've listened to a lot of your podcasts, Ahmed, and I think the story resembles a lot of your previous guests as well, right? I wasn't a rifleman as your typical guests were, right? But
they weren't actually.
I had a year or so in the light reconnaissance battalion. Went the officer way, joined, for geographical reasons purely, joined the intelligence agency, also an intelligence center we had. And then, I heard of this branch of the intelligence center that did electronic warfare, electronic surveillance, bit of SIGINT, close to where my family lived and where I'm from. And I said, hey, I'm not interested in radios. I'm not interested in communications, but, it'll be a nice commute, right? It's 30 minutes. That's more than I could ever ask for. So I joined that. And then I did that for a few years. I had a very nice deployment. Probably the best part of my time in the army was that deployment to Iraq. Came back, worked as a SME on the area of electronic warfare, electronic surveillance, was contributing to writing the manuals. We have field manuals on that, sat on some NATO working groups on electronic warfare. And then I decided to take the plunge, right, and transition, which was, I think it's the typical story as in, looking for stability. I really enjoyed my time in the army, but being deployed every third year with, if you want to create a family and all stuff, I really respect people who are able to balance that. Personally, I wasn't. I enjoyed the exercises. I enjoyed all the travel, but I also enjoyed, being at home and having an opportunity to be with my family now that I've, decided to create one. So I applied for some different positions, and then, chances had it that during one interview with one company, I got to know a person who worked for Meta, and then were, point in the direction of the position that I'm currently in as the security lead at our data center in Denmark.
Cool. This is something that I've seen, and I don't know if you can attest to that, from people that have either from military intelligence or civilian intelligence services. Is there something that people from either electronic warfare or SIGINT background find easier jobs?
I have a lot of previous colleagues that went on to the civilian sector in different roles, right? I don't know if it's easier relatively to other people with, a similar background. Had I been an infantry officer or, I think it would have been a different type of role I might have been able to apply to. But I think the mindset might be different. Like I've seen a lot of my peers who've been very successful in their transition because they have a very agile mindset coming from with an intelligence background. So I think that's definitely an advantage. Then I think that, if you work intelligence, corporate intelligence, or if you work corporate security, they are heavily influenced because there's so many previous law enforcement or military people in there. And they know these branches of the army that are often, or army or military that are often out there, as a supporting asset, right? Everybody liked getting electronic warfare information out to them, when they were standing knees deep, and the same from a human source, right? Everybody liked getting that message from a human source, a human intelligence cell, saying, don't go there or do that, or, if we go, and I think people recognize that also 20, 25, 30 years after they experienced it and say, well, that experience that I had with those kinds of people who worked in that sector, which, that might make it easier. But in general terms, I don't know. I think it's the agile mindset that makes the transition in itself easier, but not necessarily like, getting the first job.
Yeah. Interesting. Because that's something that from my own experience, what I keep hearing, that people with, EW or SIGINT backgrounds particularly are more, let's say, attractive, for employees. And maybe that's because of the connection with cyber.
Yeah, I think there's a high degree of transferability on some of the stuff you do, right? And that might be why they're more attractive. But, I also think that relates mostly maybe to some of the major nations like, in the UK or in the US, where they have these big firms also on the private side that does this. But, you're yourself coming from the Netherlands and I work in Sweden, right? And I'm coming from Denmark. Well, we don't really have that kind of industry that support a private SIGINT or electronic warfare enterprise, right? So it's very much government assets, but the mindset of correlating, collecting, analyzing a massive amount of data, understanding, dangers of circular reporting, understanding the cooperation with other ints and other single sources and how to fuse that into a product that actually adds value. I think, that's something that maybe specifically within human, I would say as well, because you got your C2X cells, I think something for the fusions, right? But also within electronic warfare and SIGINT is quite unique because we treat our capabilities with a very high degree of secrecy because they are very sensitive, right? But it's the conundrum that we also need to share the vital information to our customers. So we don't want to share a message saying somebody said something about something's going to happen somewhere, right? Because that's, then we sanitized it a lot, but we want to share something that's, with a clear so what, that's actionable and that's, well analyzed, right? And I think that mindset is, taking the massive amount of data from an EW or SIGINT perspective, translating it into something that a customer that doesn't understand that can actually use an action on. It's a skill that's very sought after in any industry, right? You could work as a technician in any other field having to translate something into senior leaders and fail in that. And then, your knowledge isn't really worth anything.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I couldn't have said it better because I think the major point or the pet peeve I hear from intelligence leaders is that it's so hard to either teach or to unlearn skills, whereby it's so hard for people that coming maybe from an academic background to convey their findings, right, in a short and succinct manner. And yourself, if you go on and on and on, you're quickly told, to shut up and, tell us exactly what's going on. So I think, that makes a lot of sense because I think that's an element that I see often missing with young analysts.
Yeah, and I agree. Like the ability to deliver that bluff, the bottom line up front. What is the value of this report? And if you can't identify it yourself, then you probably shouldn't disseminate it. You need to kill your darlings. There's all the the things that we intelligence people say to each other, right? That because if it's not worth anything, if you can't, then it doesn't matter that you've spent a week writing it up. Then it doesn't leave your computer, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm going to point at this section of the podcast to some of the younger people in my team to listen to. See, somebody else is saying, and I'm not the only one who says this. So you leave the army, and the job that you're in right now at Meta is your first job out of the army. How is that transition? Did you have difficulties? And like, how long did it take you to kind of like find your feet, pretty much?
So it's the first job out of the army. That's correct. And I think even though I said that it's probably easier for EW and SIGINT folks to transition, there's it's easier in a way that the stuff you need to do actually on the other side isn't that complex. The job you show up to do every day isn't complex in terms of the core of it. The complexity kind of comes into play when you put in the cultural element of transitioning to a civilian workspace, right? And working, perhaps especially from big tech, is way different than working from a conservative army intelligence structure where you've got a pretty flat hierarchy in the intelligence structure compared to the rest of the military because of the way it functions and the way intelligence is developed, but nothing compared to the tech realm of things, right? The cultural elements related to how you would address and have tough conversations, and this might also be like, we've briefly discussed it previously, Ahmed, is the not only the cultural difference between military and government and, tech, but also the differences between Scandinavian culture, straightforwardness, and American politeness, right? And I think I ran headfirst into both the differences between military tech and the differences between Scandinavian and American in my first year or so in that. And I had some awesome mentors that would pull me aside after a meeting and said, well, hey, you can't interrupt people, right? You need to give people, an opportunity to speak. And you might not agree. You might think that what they're saying is totally off the charts, right? Not relevant, not important, not accurate. But you won't convince them by interrupting them. Then, so what I learned during the first year, and I think the first year joining EW was probably the steepest learning curve I had in terms of leadership and technical capabilities, all the stuff. But in terms of my personal development, the first year out of the military was almost, or at least is rivaling that curve as well, because it helped me understand that the interpersonal relationships with my colleagues and peers and all this stuff, right, is just as important as what I deliver in the briefings, right, or in my advice to senior leadership. Because if there's no relationship there, they're not going to take any of your advice into account, and they won't be a team player in the work. If you're not a team player, then they won't support you either. And it's just more fun going to work in honesty in like a climate where you support each other and you back each other up, and you have those tough conversations, but you have it in a way where everybody wins. That should be the aim here. And that wasn't the military and government way. When you had these insult briefings where somebody stood up and said something that was totally off the charts, then some lieutenant colonel or colonel would have at them, right?
Outside of the people giving you advices or taking you apart and say like, hey, maybe next time do it this way, do it that way, what did you do to like improve your interpersonal skills?
So I think there was a lot of structured training within any big company, right? So there's a lot of uncover your biases. I already knew a lot of bias training. I had that from the intelligence background, right? Hey, we when we did basic and advanced analytical training, then that was the first module, almost the first at least. I think you learned the different classifications, and then you learned about biases, right? And when joining a major company, they would have some module compared to that. Most companies do, is what I'm told. So we of course did that, and made us extremely good. Then there was a lot of other training modules and a lot of other, internal training modules in terms of how you are an ally to your colleagues and how, you're measured up against different verticals as well in terms of how you treat your peers. The whole assessment system works, so you also get assessed by your peers in terms of how you support them in their goals, right? Which I think is a brilliant way of assessing people. So you're not only assessed as what you deliver, but also how you help your colleagues deliver on their goals and objectives. And then something very simple like I moved my desk to the entrance of the open office space we had, right? So every morning I made sure that I'd be in there as one of the first people. I'd say good morning to everyone passing my desk, right? I'd learn their name and greet them by name, and when they left afterwards, I'd greet them by name again, right? And you'd have those small conversations by the coffee machine, and slowly you begin to build that rapport where you start, you get to know people and you get under the skin. That's the wrong way of saying it, but you get to know them, right? And they get to know you, and I think that was genuine interest in the people that I work with, and I think they could feel it as well. And if you invest that, then they will also accept you, once in a while, accidentally interrupting them. If they say something that, and they'll respect your opinions.
I hear you. And from like members in your team, I think also for people listening to the podcast, what do you look for in a good analyst?
So in my current role, I don't do intelligence in my current role. I'm on the customer side of things, right? We have an intelligence organization that delivers that to us. But in my old role, what we look for in an analyst was the ability to be self-driven. I think that's very important from an analyst. Like you need to have a genuine curiosity, and you need to have like a drive to dig deeper. You need to consistently and repetitively ask why. Why is this the case, and what other explanations could there be? And the second question is just as important, right? Because what I think a big failure that we see, especially on geostrategic analysis, is that often the first idea that pops up into someone's head is deemed as the right one, and they don't take the time to investigate all the possible avenues or possible explanations, right? And then they need to be, or at least they need to be able to learn structure. So when I've heard a lot of your shows as well, and I think a good advice is that you specialize within a field that you're interested in if you want to get into intelligence. But when you're in, right, you need to also have, if you want to succeed as an analyst, you need to have an ability to work very deeply and invest yourself into something that you absolutely have no interest in. I think that's just as important as you being, because not every report that you're writing, you won't find that interesting. And I think, finding analysts that will put in the effort every time. And then I'll live with the grammar, I'll live with this, the way that they deliver reports. So, but if they've got the drive and the effort, no matter what topic is that they're supposed to write about, if it's, threat towards tea plantations, or it's, telephone infrastructure or whatever, then I think, you've got something that you can build on, because you'll almost never find a finished analyst, because all intelligence cells work in their own dynamics. So you need to find someone who's willing to adapt to those dynamics or can contribute to that, right?
Absolutely. It's crazy that you're just saying this now, because I had an interview with a candidate today where this is the exact thing that I said, because what makes the difference, in my opinion, between a good analyst and a great analyst is having that ability to invest into something that you're not interested in really, but also loving the process. And yeah, I'm happy that you're saying that, because that's something that is not often talked about enough. I think people are often pushed towards a direction and they think this is what I'm gonna do, and there won't be things that I don't like about it, but surprise, surprise.
But I think it's a mindset thing, right, Ahmed? Like at least I discovered in my career, just during the intro, as I told you, I never imagined myself working electronic warfare or communications, right? When I joined the army, hey, I wanted to go out there, jump in the mud, drive tanks, all the stuff that you see, right? But other factors led me down that path, and I learned to, because I invested time in it, I invested myself in it. I generally love doing it, and that kind of grew. It grows on you, and I think that's if you if you go into it and you really commit to it, then even the dullest area that you have to write about will become interesting, because you'll find elements that are interesting, right? You'll find dynamics that are interesting.
Absolutely. And because this is another interesting point you make, because most of the people, as you probably heard in this podcast, they say, I didn't know I was gonna do this. I kind of like fell into it. And I think this is, including myself, is pretty much the same. Is there, because I don't want to dissuade people or because I want to always help people that want to like improve their careers or go a certain direction. But is there a way to maybe better plan or be more prepared in career planning from a military and,
Yeah, I think, it's always important to do your career planning, right? Do your, what do you want to do in 3 years, in 5 years, in 10 years? And what do you need to do to get there? But you also just have to acknowledge that you'll experience that plan won't come to fruition. Because as you go along the way, right, 2-3 years in, you discover you want to do something new, perhaps, right? Because, I never even imagined myself that this was a possibility. So I think that the most important thing is that, it's very nice to have a goal and, go for it, definitely. But also be open to other possibilities as you traverse down that path, right? If you ask, a toddler or whatever, what they want to do, right? And you make a career plan based on that, then, there wouldn't be a lot of electronic warfare operators. There wouldn't be a lot of, because I've never heard one say that they want to be that, right?
No. So, I haven't even heard like a teenager say it, so.
No, exactly. So, so go in there and, be open that there's new opportunities and there's a world out there with a million different jobs that are all different and have nuances. And when you're in one job and you find elements that are more interesting, then pursue that, Then there's probably another job where you can do even more of that. And then don't pay too much into the labeling saying, is it intelligence or whatever? I want to do intelligence. Because if you find the elements of intelligence interesting, you'll find that a lot of other places as well. Because it's the ability to do some deep analysis, right? It's the ability to impact, key stakeholders and decision makers. It's the for a lot of people, it's the ability to, it's the military government kind of thing. You travel and you see the world, right? You go out and you know stuff that not a lot of other people do. You get to work with assets or capabilities that not a lot of other people, have ever worked with. And you'll find your own road. I don't think that there's any, you can't find two intelligence professionals that's done it the same way. And if you do, then, I'd be impressed. But if you find two intelligence professionals with the exact same background, right? If you're a practitioner, I think, going back to your question, just circling back, what can you do? It depends on your starting point, right? So I started, I went into military intelligence and very much learned, from a practitioner's perspective. So I understood that there was some elements of academia that I could kind of, bring in to kind of improve the way I did my work. So during my first few years at the unit, I also studied a full-time master's in international law and security to get kind of that academic perspective into it. And I think it's the combination of those two, understanding that academia might have theories and they might have there's a lot of PhDs out there explaining why China did X, or, why they might think that China did X and, the US did Y. But practitioners also understand that there's no simple explanation to any of these, because there's so many hidden dynamics. But it'll give you the academic approach for a practitioner in terms of structure, declaring your sources and all that stuff is very good. So, pick and choose, if you're out there, get your hands dirty on some, either join the military, right? Join the government, join a company like yourselves as an analyst, and then add in some academic pieces.
Yeah, no, I think if outside of the academics that we had on, which is a good number of them, I think you're the first one who explained it the way that you did, really, of finding the balance between the two, and actually, giving a bit of props to doing an academic study, which I always say, like, even the stuff that we are doing, or the intelligence school that we are setting up, it's not a replacement for an academic degree. It's to add to what you can learn in school. So yeah, that's a really, really good point. I would want to circle back for a second. You mentioned in your time in the military, one of your best memories or experiences was being deployed. Can you talk a bit about that and how you experienced that and how that shaped, your opinion on that?
So I phrased it as the best. I think it's the right phrasing should be the most meaningful period of my military career, right? And maybe even professional career after leaving school and all stuff, because it was an opportunity where and I think a lot of military practitioners or military officers would understand this, military personnel, that you train a lot. You show up every day, you do your training, you run your drills, you run your exercises, and then when you deploy, that's the first time where you actually get to test it out, right? So it's an opportunity for everyone to see, do we measure up? Are we as good here as we were in the pre-scripted exercises that we ran like 10, 15, 20 times at home, right? And even though they say, well, the only unit within the military or government, right, that's constantly active, that's always on some sort of up, is the intelligence, right? Because you can always do that. But the opportunity to go down and do actual tactical intelligence on the ground, and not like geostrategic stuff where you pull random stuff off the internet, right? But actual tactical intelligence to shape like the local environment and the way that the task force we supported did their maneuvers and that stuff. That was a great experience. And then the experience of, and I've always been a very hard worker, and being able to go down there and do nothing but work at that time in my life was incredible. Like, I got out of bed and then we worked 18 hours, right? Sometimes even more, walking in the middle of the night because we had to support some up or something like that, right? Or something would happen. There's no disturbance. There's no distractions. You'd hand in your uniform and, you'd get a new one cleaned or whatever, right? At some stage when they got it to you. You don't have to go to the supermarket because you really wouldn't do that there, for obvious reasons, right?
Yeah.
You had to spend, and then of course, as it was very meaningful, but also I think it was meaningful because of the stage of my life I was in. Being deployed all the time and being on deployment in general, it's still my opinion that that's a young person's game, right? But I would really stress that, a lot of my colleagues, especially within the intelligence realm, that 7 months plus 1 month, maybe 1-2 months, is probably also where, in terms of the tradecraft, how do you do assessment group meetings? How do you do information management, and why is it important, right? How do you work with different partners? How do you engage into a community, 5 communities that you're not a part of yourself, on different restrictions levels and all this stuff? What do you share? What don't you share? You can train that all you want, but if you haven't tried it in an actual, live environment, then you're missing out.
I wanted to ask you something that people keep asking me after we do podcasts. Why don't you ask this or why don't you ask that? So there's a question that always comes up, and that is, and I think this is a good example maybe that I can ask you, and I don't know if you have experience in this, but did you work with other nations' intelligence counterparts, and which ones were you particularly impressed by? Without, because this is something that people ask obviously from military guys and that are in a more kinetic role, but I don't often get the chance to ask how it is maybe in a coalition force or how that is.
So I think I can speak to it broadly, like over the terms of my career, right? So because we worked a lot with, predominantly in NATO forces and also on exercises and deployments and courses. And I think there's the thing that surprised me the most was that within the intelligence functions, in the military, within all the countries that I've worked with, you have some of the most brilliant people, and you have some of the people, at the other end of the scale as well. And that doesn't, no matter what country you pick and choose from or what partner, you'll always experience both. I was very impressed by, we worked with British, UK signals as well, 14.6. I think they were mentioned in one of your podcast episodes as well. We worked with the Corps over there. I was very impressed with them and their background, how they would make a young corporal or young, lance corporal, into a very proficient analyst that were able to stand up in front of a colonel and give a very convincing, intelligence brief. I think that's impressive. We've worked with, over the time of my career, again, we worked with a lot of different special forces as well. and the mindset that they share, like the can-do attitude of let's get things done and skip the politics kind of thing, right? But I just singled out one nation, so it's and they have their disadvantages as well in terms of how they recruit and what they do and all the stuff. But that was very impressive. I think it would be shameful if I didn't signal out the Swedes or the Norwegians, just because culturally and attitude-wise, the Danish and the Swedes and Norwegians are so similar, right? Even with the Dutch, I've always thought that the Dutch are kind of an exile Nordic country, because the way we approach things are so similar.
Yeah, very similar
in all realms.
Mm-hmm.
Also within electronic warfare. And it's been, in general, I haven't had any bad experiences or any bad coalition partners in that way. We were very restricted in terms of what we could share with whom because of the realm we worked in with the electronic warfare and SIGINT. And therefore, it was and intelligence is, because it's a matter of trading information, right? I think that might not be obvious to people not being in the actual realm, right? Hey, if you give me some, then I'll give you some kind of thing, even if you're in a coalition. And I think the biggest challenge to that was being in a coalition with the Five Eyes nations, knowing that they had a lot of intelligence that they couldn't share. And we had some intelligence that were national only, of course, that we wouldn't share, but we were in the same upright.
Strange how that works.
It is. It's very, and it's funny because when the people you recruit to the intelligence functions, I think are very, hands-on, want to get stuff done, hard workers. There's not a lot of politics in there, is my experience at least. And then you put them into a box that is heavily political, right? That they have to maneuver in, and that's an interesting context. So there's a lot of yellow notes being passed on the hallway. That's not officially from that or that partner, but everybody knows that
a bit of horse trading, as they say.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, something also that I was interested in, considering the role that you do now, what are some of the geopolitical challenges that you face in your current role?
I think that's a tough question though, Ahmed, right? On the customer side from a geopolitical, because I've always had a very hard time with geopolitical analysts and geopolitical products, because they tend to be very, the relevance of them tend to be very little to people actually doing on the ground work, right? They're very nice in a way that, you'll pay millions of dollars into a geopolitical cell that'll support the CEO of some big company to make, far-reaching strategic decisions. But if you're involved in an operational context, as I am as a security lead of a data center, right? Geopolitical information, to me, and the gist and the bluff of those reports are often not better than what I can look up on the internet myself. And I think I've also done posts on LinkedIn about this, and this might be because of the type of individuals that are recruited into the geostrategic realm versus and especially maybe on the corporate side. And I think this is the crux of my argument that I've tried to make on LinkedIn as well, is that we recruit in the corporate realm because money is just bigger. They recruit strategic people to do tactical reporting. And what comes out is strategic reporting on tactical incidents, right? Which is very generic often, I think is the best words to use, and therefore not really useful. And the other one is that when you then actually need to do tactical intelligence out, in the corporate realm, which exists, right? You don't call it intelligence, you call it investigations. And who's better to do investigations than a former law enforcement person, police officer? And the case is that they just have a way different mindset. So what ends up coming your way is that you'll end up having a very high level strategic analyst doing something for your area, that a report for your area where you actually know more than they do because you're right there on the ground, right? And you'll have a former law enforcement officer doing what we would call if they do insider threat investigations, like doing like a target pack almost method, right? But not that, because they're so set in their ways of thinking from the police side of things, so they're not willing to say, well, he might be he might have done that, or might the uncertainty that they allow in their assessments are just so minimal, meaning that what they can produce in terms of intelligence isn't really worth anything. So they miss that analytical courage, they miss the outside the box thinking, and And I think that's a big struggle within the industry as a whole. That I hope we can all change over the coming years.
No, I've seen this. I've worked alongside people. I worked for somebody who was actually on a podcast that is from a law enforcement background, and it was often, it had to be evidence-led, so intelligence and evidence are not the same thing, right? So as you said, you talked about uncertainty. You said minimal. I think in most cases it's non-existent, so it has to be this happened and we need to be able to prove that it happened. And I think one field maybe that did a great job on tradecraft, at least in the OSINT community, I think they do a good job of blending those two. I think where they fail, and that's not necessarily their fault because maybe the training or the background is not there, but is that how they convey their findings, right, to you or to other decision makers. And I think that is I don't know if it's a huge problem, but it is a problem. And I don't know what the exact solution is from an outsider, because for us, we try to basically 1 week them get the tactical stuff and the other week do the strategic stuff and switch them over as much as we can. And we give them opportunities to work on tactical products. I think outside of experience and exposure, it's very difficult to teach.
And I agree with that, but I think, the mentality that you have to, and that comes with experience, so I totally agree with that. But the mentality is, or needs to be, just as any other thing, right? And I think that's also where academia can kind of blend in, is that you need to know, or you need to identify the questions you want to, find answers to before you begin. And you can do a preliminary, dive in and see, but you can't just say, I want to know something about Chinese-US relationship, because that my customer might be interested in that. But you need to go, you need to be, and I think this is what sets aside like the intelligent or the excellent intelligence and security firms in the private world from those that are just, producing more spam, mass, reproducing news from other outlets and, putting their own logo on the header. Is that you need to have a very deep conversation with your customers. You need to understand their business better than than anything, because you need to understand the dynamics that they are interested in. And then you need to develop that, I think I in the military, we call it command's critical information requirement, right? What information is critical, which questions are critical for us to be able to answer, for them to make a business decision that adds value to them or reduces risks, right? Or, exposes risks. And for a lot of people, right, they, and I think this is where I take a jab at the OSINT folks, right? Because they think, they can just put us, not they, sorry, I'm speaking to them as a uniform kind of group of people, right? But, a lot of OSINT work seems to, at least in the beginning, because people thought that, well, it's just the internet, right? Anybody could do it. Seems to be, hey, let me Google something. And then, one is, they don't have the craftsmanship of the intelligence field. So there's a huge, and I'd really, if somebody could map this out, this would be excellent. But but the amount of circular reporting within the OSINT community and within that is astonishing, right? Because they don't declare their sources, which is okay, but they don't declare anything. They don't declare their uncertainties, right? There's no standard yardstick, as the mod uses as an example, right? And then the other thing is that there's a convergence happening, and when I was in the military, we talked about the convergence in terms of cyber, meaning that cyber was this big thing that everybody wanted to invest in from a government perspective. So if you called your item cyber, even if it wasn't really cyber, then you'd get money, right? And therefore everybody, tried to kind of go in under the cyber umbrella, which, was wise from a funding perspective, but also kind of messed up all the theoretical frameworks and how we understand and how we do, how we understand cyber and electronic warfare as a way that they're dependent on each other, as an example. And I think OSINT is very much the same. Like OSINT, everybody knows OSINT, right? I think Bellingcat's done an excellent job of putting that on the agenda as a very popular example. And now, whatever you're doing, you'll call it OSINT. Well, what you're doing might actually be IMINT, right? It might actually be SpaceInt or GeoInt or whatever, which is as a niche in itself. but you think you can do it because you've just labeled yourself as an OSINT expert, right? So I think, this is me again acknowledging that I know nothing about OSINT, but from an outside perspective, we should slim down the OSINT definition for these folks, separate it up into the actual disciplines that are present, right? And then make sure to declare what they're doing. I think that's the most important thing there.
Yeah. If anybody that's listening to this, if you listen to this podcast, I've said all of the things I'm just saying already. So it's a theme, right? What I've learned, because what we do at Great Dynamics, it can be split into two. It's the stuff that we do for an online audience, which is open source, right? And what we do for clients, it's very different. And what we do for clients and asking, what are critical requirements, is us having conversations, and sometimes it is requirements that they don't even know they have, right? That they ought to know, right? Where I think with the open source side, where that problem comes is, who is your audience, right? Because it's not a figure that you can, either engage with, unless you have an audience that you can engage with and ask questions and these type of things. So I forgive people in OSINT for that, but I think the one trouble that exists in OSINT, what I don't see people talking about, and you mentioned something about this, is that the declaring of sources is often not done because it's malicious, or the reason they often don't declare sources is because they want to keep it to themselves. And it's a competition. And the competitive element is what is hitting, the value of your reporting. And I don't know if that's understood. And it's also because it's such a unstructured, almost rebel-like community, right? And, a guy sitting in his bedroom can do this and, can become like a huge on Twitter or anything, which I respect. And I love some of those guys too, and girls. But circular reporting, go to Telegram, take it from Telegram, translate it poorly, put it on Twitter. Then somebody takes it from Twitter and then it ends up at a think tank, So, and then before you know it, you are quoted by the New York Times. And they don't even know who you are. You're an 18-year-old in your bedroom,
They'll confirm it by the original Telegram one, right? So now they got two sources in it, which is the, I acknowledge everything you said there, because, and it's totally accurate. The competition from a corporate side, I think you're right. That might be the aspect because from a government military side, why you wouldn't declare your sources? We would have two reports. We would have a report that would go to the community that we shared all information with, right? The SIGINT EW community. And I know Human has the same, and then we would have a report that would go to, that would go to the all source community for fusing with other single sources. The one that was specific to electronic warfare would have all the identifiers needed, right? So, and I think it would be the same from a human perspective. Like the one going into the human section would have all the identifiers needed to avoid one human team speaking to one person and then another human team speaking to the same person. And then those two teams writing, individual reports. And then all of a sudden you've got two reports coming from the same source, right? Because that's, pretty bad. Well, and it happens, right? But I think that is the thing that OSINT in a corporate realm needs to battle with, is that you something will trend on some platform and you don't know the validity of that information because they're too bad at declaring their sources. And if you're really a dedicated OSINT analyst or intelligence analyst, then dedicate your sources, and I think the audience will follow, because they will then at least the people who understand the business will know that, and it'll also be a way of, for yourself of covering your own ass and understanding like what you're reporting, and separating. And I think that's another part of it. When you see these geostrategic analysis or disseminated reports, or even the OSINT reports, when we wrote reports, we had a clear delineation between the fact, the comment, and the assessment, right? And it's very clear for obvious reasons, because, if you mix all of that together, you have to spend a lot of, and then it becomes an academic discipline and going in and actually deciphering in it, what is actually opinions here, what's context, and what have we got from sources, and it shouldn't be in this environment, right? But with the background of geostrategic analysts, often coming from academia, that's how they learn to write intelligence reports, and for them, and I remember this for myself when I studied, it seems that they almost need to dumb down their argument to put it in intelligence, because the fluidity, of course, is impacted. Reading a good intelligence report doesn't mean that it's fluent in how it's written. It's not written like a novel. But reading it, the value of it is that you can see the argument clearly from the beginning to the end in the assessment, and you can see all the bits and pieces that led to that assessment. And if you get and that's why also there's a million companies doing this one slide PowerPoint kind of presentation of something they call intelligence, which it's very nice to print out and have on your whatever wall you'd use, right? Or it's nice for a briefing where you can talk through that slide, but delivering it on social media platforms, saying this is the recent intelligence coming out of Ukraine, and then you got a series of formations scattered across Ukraine. And then someone else.
I hear you, and it's something that we deal with ourselves, and we've kind of, as you said, we've templatized it. So we have the background, and then we have our key judgments, supporting evidence, and the analytic, comment at the bottom. And the thing is, I'm seeing now organizations doing that more and more. But when we started doing that, I would get questions. Why are you guys doing this? Right? Because I wanted to make clear, we are not doing information. We're doing intelligence. And I want to show, and sometimes it's not great or good, but I want to show that there is a difference and that there is a method behind the madness, and it's not the same. And actually, I'm happy when I see other people doing it, because at least I had some impact on, what they're doing, and they're doing it, in my opinion, the correct way. So I know we are getting a little bit into the weeds here, but it's not often that I can talk about these things. I'm happy you indulging me in these topics.
But it's not very Tom Cruise-ish, right? It's not very Mission Impossible kind of, hey, you need to have a template and you need to have structure on your reporting, right? You need to declare your sources. Well, hey, and for me as well, like I think, that is what sets aside like an intelligence function, that's actually functioning from someone who is, just trying to, as you said, just a rogue right out there, trying to kind of, get a foot in the door on this kind of thing where money's just poured into from all companies because, they want their own geostrategic analysts, right? Which, hey, you can grab that off, anywhere, right? Basically.
Yeah, you're right.
It's interesting, at least.
I think to that, what you just said there, do you think that we also have responsibility in educating the clients on what intelligence is and is not, and what it can do and it cannot do?
I think that's that's like the ethics of the business, right? You can, and I think and that's a responsibility of anyone. Like, I wouldn't hire a carpenter to come in and then I would tell them how to do the carpentry, right? They would need to advise me on how, the best result is when they're done. And I think that is the same for any trade where you have a certain amount of knowledge on how to do stuff and somebody is buying your services. Well, then you have to engage in that dialogue, saying, well, if you want intelligence on that, and that, or if you want, actual decision supporting reports or elements that support you in your business process, then we need to get A, B, and C, or, then it'll require D, E, or F. And, it's very easy for any company just to take the money, right? Take the money, have a, half a desk sitting somewhere, doing, having a Boolean search set up on Google for Google Alerts, maybe monitoring TweetDeck, right? And then, when their name is mentioned, you'll send a signal to the CEO on email, right? And you need to send one every week so they know your name. But the but that doesn't add any value, right?
No.
But the problem is that a lot of customers don't know what they don't know, right? They don't know what intelligence is. They don't know what sets aside the bad actors in this market, as in the unethical companies, and those that actually try and do intelligence, because intelligence isn't cheap. So they have, if they have to pay to get that service, they have to invest not only, of course, money, but also time in training the intelligence staff on their business model and what's important to them. So if you and I think that's why some of these models that intelligence companies have, where you'll sign up for a different, class or whatever, you'll be a customer, right? That relationship, you won't deliver them actionable intelligence from day one, because it's a give and take kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's a relationship that needs to develop over time, where they get to learn your business and you get to learn them and what they can provide and what they can't provide. Because you can't, also as an intelligence function, you can't be an expert on all areas, all industries, all geographical areas as well. And you need to acknowledge that, and you need to declare that. And then I think, there's an onus on the corporate intelligence companies or risk mitigation companies or whatever you call them, due diligence services, KYC services, whatever, right? To sit down with the client, and a lot of this could be hashed out, like, send your analysts to the actual customer you're supporting, have them work out of their office for a week to understand the business, get a tour of the facilities, get those insights, so you understand what the pain points is, what will actually impact it, and what's important to them.
Do you think that analysts should, because this is another issue that I see, do you think that analysts should work more on their interpersonal skills? Because often if a company hires an intelligence company and they might have something like an intelligence function already, there is competition. Like, why do we need these guys on the outside? And I think that needs to be hashed out immediately, because I've seen it that people within the organization will go to their manager and say, why do we need these guys? Or they're actively trying to undermine what you're doing, even though you're there to help them, right? So that's such a difficult such a difficult one. And also having analysts that are capable and strong enough also to go into an organization and put this on and
it's the same structure. If you're a McKinsey consultant coming into a company, right? You'll experience the same thing. If you're an ISO auditor or whatever, you'll experience the same thing, right? If you buy one of those services. So I think it's just that's just the mechanisms of being an external consultant within any industry. But and in honesty, and I think you said it yourself, like the internal intelligence function will go to the manager and said, well, why do we need them? Because you have us. We're doing it already or whatever. And I think to me, hiring an external company in to do intelligence, if the subject is so similar to each other as the internal department you've got, is a clear signal to your internal department that they need to get their stuff together and start providing you with something that's actually valuable to the business. Because if the external department coming in can do that without sitting there Monday to Friday, without sitting in the business meetings, without all the privileged information that any internal intelligence unit would have, then you're really doing a bad job. Because any internal intelligence function is so far ahead of the external consultants coming in, because they live and breathe the company culture and the way the company is structured, and they understand the specific context and whatever is important to the business leaders, because they engage with them on a weekly, daily, monthly, whatever basis, right? That they should be, the projects that they deliver should be way above those that any external consultant could deliver. When external consultants are brought in anyway, I think it's a matter of they can contribute with some diverse perspectives to some of these intelligence functions that's kind of very stuck in their ways, and they can I think as you said it yourself, you're there to help them. You're there to and I think this is a way of undermining your own business maybe, Ahmed, but the industry out there is pretty large, right? But if they don't take what you're good at, when you come in, and then adopt it into their own function, then it's their own fault. Then they will become irrelevant over time. And of course, as the benefit you have is that you've seen 100 different companies in different industries and how they do and solve the intelligence question. So you'll bring that perspective in when you come in as an external consultant. But this is what's always kind of bothered me, is that if I can get an intelligence report off LinkedIn, that's worth more than the intelligence reports I get off of our full-time analysts sitting inside the company or something. Not saying that's the case, but if you're sitting in a company where that is the case, then you need to shake up the intelligence functions that you have, because then they're not, they should start paying rent.
Yeah, that is true. I wanted to ask you a question that I don't always ask, but I think it's an interesting one. Is there anything that keeps you up at night?
I don't know if you've heard, I think we've had a very good discussion or talk over the last hour almost, Ahmed, here, and I think the state of maturity within the private intelligence industry, I still find extremely, was a huge surprise when I transitioned. And so will, over the last years, everybody's seen it. There's, masters popping up left and right on intelligence studies and cyber studies. I think, that might solve some of it from an academic perspective, like provide a lot of tools and, provide some best practices and all that stuff. But there's still a dog with a ball kind of thing. Like, every, 90% of all the geostrategic analysts sitting there are analyzing on the same items. So we're very much, and that's why you, in every company or in every military organization, you had a collection plan, right? That covered your entire area of responsibility. But that method of working isn't as prolific in the corporate world. Like, you don't identify this. You don't map it out. You go from shiny thing to shiny thing, and then when something pops up, it's always a surprise. So the ability to be forward-looking in your assessments, the ability to foresee things, right? So you can actually enable business to take action and not just report on what has happened. I think that continuously surprises me, and is honestly, it makes me wonder sometimes of why we have these corporate intelligence functions, because they are more, they are a corporate news channel for a lot of companies. Like they correlate news and then they provide it internally with a 2-line commentary, which isn't hey, I have my own API set up that will prompt me when there's a breaking news locally, right? That doesn't provide me any value. I think that that, and the failure from senior leadership, especially, to see that that the value provided to tactical decision makers is very small from a corporate intelligence side, because 90% of the business focuses on supporting senior leadership in these businesses. That's the I don't have a way of solving that, or even if it should be solved, is that's just the way it is.
Or it can be solved.
Or if it can be solved, exactly.
Yeah.
But it's something that I keep every time somebody tries to sell or talk about corporate intelligence. If the next slide that they show, is a globe, and the highlighting all the different conflicts that they're covering or whatever, right? Then I'm out. And unfortunately, that's like it's political science majors coming in and just doing more political science stuff, basically, from a corporate world.
It's from time to time we take like interns that we train becoming analysts, and it's funny when they go out into the wider world and they get jobs, and some of them get really good jobs in corporate intelligence teams. And one, I'm not gonna say a name and where this person is at, but somebody I was really proud of in our team, and went into the private sector, got a really good job, and then maybe 2 months in, I get a phone call. We don't do intelligence. I'm not hired to do intelligence. I'm doing risk monitoring, or, this is not. And it is, to me, a surprise when they go to, and I'm not going to say names of companies, but they go into other organizations way bigger than us. And they're like, the funniest one was, I'm now embedded analyst at a company, at a large organization with global footprint, and I know more than my manager when we're talking about intelligence. And that's the person who's supposed to train me, they tell me. So I am seeing what you're saying, but I don't know I can only do what we can do And the stuff that we do for our clients is very niche, and we don't pretend to solve all problems, with all kinds of solutions. But yeah, I hear what you're saying. And I think a bit of education of intelligence consumers as well as analysts and collectors is, I think, where we can have the most impact.
Right. I think you've answered excellently here at the end, because I've struggled since I came out, like, with the conundrum, or is there any intelligence companies out there that actually does tactical intelligence, right? That actually try and better themselves, because that embedded analyst that you spoke to there, he's embedded in the company, but I'll wager you that he sits there doing reports on Ukraine and Crimea or whatever one week, right? Saying, this has increased tensions politically in XYZ. And this company might not even have any affiliates, in Ukraine that's impacted. And then there's a demonstration or something like that locally that they don't catch, because that's not the focus. Or there's a railroad strike in London, so no one can commute to work. Well, they didn't catch that one, because their focus is on the Israel-Palestine conflict. And I think someone, and I'll just summarizing from our conversation, right? And I'll hope you agree, but otherwise just say so. I've met afterwards, but someone needs to in their dialogue with senior management, tell them that, hey, this geostrategical stuff, some of it might be very important to you, but impact to business, we can provide, we can use those resources better on a local or regional level for where you're present, in terms of what's happening on the ground near your office in London, or what's happening on the ground, and especially when you're an embedded analyst, that should be what you're thinking about. Then you can buy whatever strategic products you need to understand the Ukraine-Crimea conflict.
I agree. I'm not gonna pretend like that's not a conversation I've had often. And I think for us, the way we saw that we could compete was, we just go and talk to people in places where nobody else wants to go or can go. And that's the best way I saw we could compete. So the people that come to us are not really interested in larger themes, because they're interested in what's right in front of them.
And they should be.
Exactly. And we cannot, for example, oil and gas company operating in Nigeria, and they're thinking of expansion to maybe a neighboring country or a region. Well, what they ask us is, all right, it's all well and good what the newspapers are saying and what's in the open source. I want to know what the governor has to say, or what the locals have to say. Do they even want us there, right? And I know that most of my competition is not going to do that. So these are the type of problems and areas we focus on. So we have some corporate clients, but majority of our clients are governments. So because we cover mainly a very specific problem set around, either from an irregular warfare perspective or from a direct threat in a specific location, or that they try to understand. So I remember the first client who ever told me, F OSINT. I don't care about that. And I don't even know if they knew what OSINT was, but they saw, like, if everybody can do it, then why am I paying you to do it? Because I can do it myself then. They were like, we want you to talk to the person that is in this region, or we want you to talk, like, do these rebels really hate us? Or can we operate there, and, do they welcome us providing support to whatever, location they're in? So those are the type of things that we focus on.
That would be variable, right? Instead of having an analyst go in and look at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or whatever, right, travel advisory, and then communicating it in a one slide to you saying, well, you probably shouldn't go there.
Yeah. And to be fair with you, when I started, that's the type of stuff we did, until somebody said, guys, this is not making a difference for us, right? Do what you're good at, do what you're trained to do. And that's when we realized, all right, we need to change our ways and we need to refocus. So I do agree with you on what you said. Any pieces, you already gave a lot of advice to analysts and people who want to get into intelligence. Was there anything you want to add to that?
Don't overthink it, right? Do make your career plan as you discussed there, or as we discussed earlier. And then, hey, life changes, things changes, opportunities come, and and you don't have to accept every opportunity that comes along, because another one will also come, So and then put in the work, be diligent, be, as we discussed, what sets apart the good analyst from the excellent one, right? Put in the effort also on those pieces that you initially find, boring or tedious. Then, if you deliver consistently to a, or at least if you learn something as you deliver it, I think that's the two elements, right? You need to grow personally in the way, when you write your reports, you need to learn something on the topic, or you need to grow professionally, as in kind of, how your manager or the company kind of, perceives you as an analyst, right? And if you can identify one of those two aspects in what you're doing, hey, then keep doing it.
Great. Any recommendations on what you're reading or what you're watching, what you're listening to right now?
I had to catch up on your podcast, right? So just because I was missing the last few episodes there before this one, so I'd recommend everyone going and listen to that, of course. But hey, if you're listening to this podcast, then that's kind of void, right? I think the book that I'm reading, and I'm rereading actually, is the book Factfulness by Hans Rosling, which I think he's actually Swede, so you'd recognize that one, right? And I really enjoyed that, the way it handles and talks about data. I think it's a contested book in how it's how it presents items, but it's also when you operate in the world that you and I do in it, be it intelligence or security, sometimes it's very nice to see that things are actually getting better and not worse, right? So that's one of the books that I'm reading. But I'm like one of those, I never only read one book, right? I have 5 or 6 or 7 books, going all the time, and then, pivot in between, depending on, what the mood is. So, I think the most important thing is, read, do something, even audiobooks, right? Just, keep learning about the subject that you're interested in, and then also pivot outside that sphere, right, to something else, so you might discover new interests.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I don't know if I ever talked about this in a podcast, but for me, like, I read a lot, not just for work or anything. It's just I've always enjoyed it since I was a kid. But so my parents did at least a good job with that, teaching me to enjoy that. But I'm reading now a book. I'm rereading a book because there's a second part that came out. This is more of a spy novel. I think people will really enjoy. I don't know if you ever heard of Terry Hayes. He wrote I Am Pilgrim. It's a fantastic book. Like I can say honestly that I can recommend it to anybody. It's 7 years old now, but his second book was highly anticipated. Came out, which is The Day of the Locust. And from what I'm hearing from my buddies that are reading it, they're saying it's amazing. But I wanted to read the story, the original story, and then go back to it.
It's not one of those issues you'll bring on the airplane, right? I saw 890 pages.
Yeah, but you read it. you read it pretty fast. And I read a lot of Japanese manga, which I've always, since I was a teenager, I've done that. So that's something that I'm reading now. One on a wandering samurai called Vagabond. It's actually really good. So that I can recommend. But thank you so much, Michael, for your time, for your insights, for your passionate opinions. And I think it will make a lot of people think what you have to say, because it's not often that somebody comes on a podcast and opens an attack like that on corporate intelligence and the status quo. So, and I appreciate it, because there's a lot of things that I have clients that listen to the podcast and they will let me know, like, oh, it's so interesting what that person have to say. So in this case, I think, and the person that I'm talking about right now, he will know when he listens to it. He's an avid fan of the podcast. But I think you made a lot of good points that I always try to tell him about, the approach of this stuff. And when he sends me an article about what's going on, or somebody's doing similar work as we are doing, and I'm like, just look at any of the sources. There's not one named, So yeah, thank you so much again for your time. And I I really hope to speak with you again and follow what you will post on LinkedIn, and really enjoy that. Anywhere people can find you, or if you want to be found,
feel free to engage with me directly on LinkedIn, right? And I truly, I can't stress this enough, like the importance of mentorship, right? Having mentors in the sector.
Absolutely.
And I think we are still a very tight knit, closed off, community. But I think my last kind of statement in this podcast would be: if you're sitting out there with any wish of going into this, right, or into corporate security or corporate intelligence, then find yourself some mentors. I've had 3 or 4 mentors over my brief career on the other side of the fence, as we call it here, right, in the corporate realm, and they've all contributed with unique perspectives and unique items that kind of helped me grow my career. So
absolutely,
should do that.
That's a great piece of advice, actually. I can only second that. Same for me, particularly understanding this weird industry and making introductions, because that's another one. If you don't know the person, or you didn't serve together, or it's such a hard, especially because we are a suspicious bunch, it's hard to talk to people. But thank you so much. And for everybody listening, if you made it this far, thank you guys for all the support. And I want to also give a special shout out. You mentioned it already, Michael, to the countries in the Nordics. I know I've mentioned that I live in Sweden, but I think Sweden, Finland, Denmark, and Norway are all represented in the top 20 listeners. Sweden and Norway and Denmark are all in the top 10 even. So, which is above, because it's not that big of populations. But thank you for all the support, and thank you guys, and anybody listening to the podcast that is interested to coming on and sharing your story, reach out. Thank you.